a good friend of ours, Mikey, was going to write an article on iFarm. He was like, what do you want me to call the article? And I was like, call it iFarm the worst band ever.
Welcome, everyone, to This Was The Scene, the podcast that takes a look back at the late 90s, early 2000 punk scene. I am your host, Mike Doyle. iFarm were a skate punk rock band, later turned melodic hardcore / punk band with pop punk and thrash elements. They started in Ithaca, New York, and ended in Brooklyn, New York. iFarm consisted of Arun Farm, John Meredith, Josh Carothers, and also included John Conklin, Jeremy Curtin, Phil Thye, and Jaime Villamarin. I hope I said all of your names right because I suck at doing last names. iFarm released material from the early 1990s to 2006. If I do remember this correctly, when I was younger, my buddy Mike Angelucci, aka Luch, had bought, I think, a demo from them or their CD or something. So from what I remember, he had introduced us to iFarm, and they were a band that my band Lane Meyer played a bunch of shows with, but we never really truly got to meet them. I think also because I was probably very afraid of them because of just, I have no idea why, which is so funny because talking to Aaron in this interview, he's like the nicest person and he's super fucking smart, which is just funny that I was intimidated by this band back then from what I can remember. Luckily, I was introduced to Aaron by Brian from Plow United. If you want to hear Brian's interview, you can go to episode 41 after you're done listening to this one. He reached out to me with a list of people and said, hey man, here's a bunch of people. Would you like to talk to them? And I said, yes, Aaron sounds like he'd be fantastic. So he connected us and we got on the phone or the Skype, and this is what we talked about. Working for Obama, Binghamton, New York, growing the Ithaca punk scene, being buddies with Plow United, touring with Anti-Flag, Propaganda and the Queers, Operation Cliff Clavin, and a ton more. Now make sure to check out Josh's band from iFarm. It's called Chilton. And I'll put a link in the show notes, which are also located on the episodes page of This Was The Scene. The album is called Little Birds, and Aaron had nothing but amazing things to say about this album. So I listened to it as well, and it's pretty fucking good. So go check it out. Again, it's Chilton, and it'll be in the show notes. You could also just go to Bandcamp. It's chilton444.bandcamp.com, or just search for them. But go listen to them, and go listen to all the iFarm catalog if you'd like to. I'm going to keep the intro short because I know a bunch of people want to just get into this, so I'm just going to say really quick things. To help keep the podcast going, just go to thiswasthescene.com and you can become a Patreon for $1 a month, which is like 3.5 Starbucks coffees if you were to purchase them this week, and it's like $12 a year, so that's what I'm doing the math there. Or you could donate one time, whatever you'd like, with the donate button on thiswasthescene.com. I appreciate any amount. If it's $1, if it's $2, if it's $60,000, that's helpful. You can buy some merch because that also helps as well. Or you could just share the podcast with a friend by just texting them or emailing them this episode or any episode or thiswasthescene.com, or you can just tag them on a post on the Instagram account, which is This Was The Scene. All of that is very helpful in growing this. And again, I said I was going to keep it short, so there you go. Feel free to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with anyone who would love some nostalgia. With that said, let's get started. It's so funny because I was in a band called Lane Meyer. I don't know if I had said that.
Yeah.
We had played a few shows with you guys back in the late 90s. And I've told the story so many times of us playing a show in Binghamton where you guys were late. And I think it was like someone from your band reached out, or someone from iFarm reached out to me through Facebook. It was like, oh, I remember that story because this girl, she like grabbed the mic in our set. She's like, "Where's iFarm?"
Oh God.
And she was like basically just like telling us that we sucked, and we're like, "Get off the fucking mic." And
you're like, hey.
Yeah, and then like I think it was someone in your band. They messaged me. I get so confused by this, but they were like, "I remember that fucking show. We were late." I was like, "Wow, I can't believe." I mean,
I bet it was Josh. Our drummer's got a mind like a trap.
It might be. Yeah, it might have been him. I thought that was just so funny because I've told that story so many times. So it's anytime I tell stories that I remember, like a band, like a couple weeks ago, someone mentioned Against All Authority, and I was like, oh my God, I got to get those guys on. So it's just like through random conversation. Yeah. But so just mentioning it was like, oh man, I got to get you guys on here. So, and here we are talking about, well, nothing yet, but it'll get there.
Nothing yet.
But I did a little research on you, which I usually, I remember people from back then and just kind of just wing it. This is like super casual, but I'll do a little bit of research. And you were because you were on Obama's campaign doing a film about him, or you worked at the White
Yeah, no,
House?
I was his one of his video people. So I was the new media road director, which meant I traveled with then Senator Obama and ran a group of people who were doing the videos, the graphics, and the blogs. And that was obviously a big impulse to move to Washington afterwards administration. So it wasn't formally until taking that job, and it was just an issue of time, actually. But this is a point of trivia for
Okay.
us that iFarm stopped playing shows. We actually never officially broke up. It was just I started becoming too busy.
Yeah,
Although that
yeah.
being said, I sound like a tough guy. Someone asked us to play recently, and I was like, "Yeah, totally." And then we tried to practice, and we were like, "This is going to take a very, very long time."
Why? Just because you can't? Are you guys not close to each other?
We don't have the they have the chops. I don't like. If you don't play for a few years, playing that fast becomes
Oh
very,
yeah.
very hard. And it's so funny when you're playing in a band like that. It even happened at a height. It's like if something happens and knocks you off and you're in the middle of playing very fast, it just sounds like scary, terrifying nonsense because you're just not in it, and everyone else is, and they all get it. And it was funny having that feeling again after 5 or 6 years when trying to practice recently. But no, actually in iFarm world there've been a lot of things going on. Most notably of which, and I'm glad in a way that we got our first interview delayed a couple of weeks because now it's out, which is Chilton, which is the first, which is Josh Carothers from iFarm's first solo record that he put together with Bill Stevenson and a bunch of folks from the Descendants out in Colorado, and it's really good. His band's called Chilton, and the album's called Little Birds,
Okay.
and you got to check it out.
Okay.
It's like,
Is it on Spotify?
yes, and it's sort of iFarmy, but not really. It's got a lot more kind of like skate 1980s heart in it.
That's good. Do you see the do you know have you seen the video that you guys have on YouTube? It's you guys are skating around and the cop yells at you. I did
Yes, this is back from college. Yeah, Shane,
yeah.
our friend,
Yeah,
the
and
band Smack.
someone like moons the camera at the end. They're talking about his ass and it's like slow motion.
Tweed out. Yes, yes. It's funny. The few, like, look, and I guess it's for you too. Maybe you all were a little younger. Like, we were part of that first kind of digital wave where, like, we didn't really even book our tours, like, digitally. Like, we were just sort of coming in on the edge of that. So we had no, like, coherent YouTube strategy or any of this stuff, which has been good because I'm sure I said all kinds of frightful things that would have prevented me from getting a government job.
Yeah, I was. That's why I was really intrigued by this because I remembered iFarm. Yeah, and you're like, I work for Obama. I'm going, where is the connection here?
Yeah, and people knew. Every now and then they'd be like, "Hey, that's some punk thing. You should ask Arun. He knows about that crap." Uh, but like, uh, it was good, but it was also bad because we have such a sort of weird repository of just sort of half-assed things that are on the internet. You couldn't find like
Yeah.
our best stuff just trolling around.
Yeah, it is really scattered. There is no specific spot. And then when I looked up iFarm on Wikipedia, it just goes right to you and talks about your whole history. I think just because, I mean, I think anyone having a connection to the Obama and shit like that would be number one on Google for
Totally.
like
No,
research.
totally. And it's funny when I have these conversations, there's two reactions. There's nothing in the middle. There's like, oh, that makes a ton of sense. You were always kind of like that, or like, what the fuck, man? Like you went straight from punk rock to federal government. How did that work? So usually people have extreme reactions.
That's a good segue because that's how we're gonna go way back in time when you were a kid and come up to like what got you into music, what got you into punk, and then what led you to getting into iFarm, and then talk about shows and things like that and tours you guys did. And so I guess we're gonna learn that connection there. So this will be the
Yeah.
interview for myself, just so I can be like, oh, that makes total sense of why. I'd probably through this interview I'll be like, ah, there we go.
Lots of knowing Oz. Yeah, that'll be good.
But are you, before we start though, you are just literally just going back and forth between here and like London and shit, or are you constantly just traveling the
Yeah,
world?
I'm mostly I'm traveling now, which is really tough on our kids and on my wife. But it's hopefully temporary. They're going to come out between Houston and DC and Rome and London right now mostly,
Jeez.
and that's working on a lot of actually smaller political races out there, trying to sort of mostly prove things rather than demonstrate huge movement building capability.
And you're basically just not just, but you do video, like you're documenting it.
I am doing creative strategy. So that could be as simple as picking up a camera and making a video with someone. It can be as complex as kind of sorting out what their whole editorial calendar might look like for the next few months.
That's so cool. Do you love it?
Love it.
That's
Love it. And in
great.
fact, like a punk rock buddy is now basically the prime minister of Kosovo. And I think y'all should check him out. Albin Kurti, spent a bunch of time in demonstrations and actually in prison in Serbia. And it's kind of, I think, one of the first sort of Gen X kind of post-punk protest movement leaders we have. I know it's sort of care about so much, but that's my niche. That's me. So for me, it feels really good. It feels like representation. We have some punks actually hitting the big time.
Do you see that? And again, I want to jump into the interview, but like I live in Raleigh, North Carolina now, and I live in this small little bubble of this town, and I don't really go anywhere, and I just kind of just try to live a very just chill, simple life. But I mean, obviously the news is in my face, and when I see that stuff, I keep thinking like, is it as bad or is it kind of blown out of proportion when it's on the news? Like from you being there firsthand and seeing this shit, like what's your perspective?
That the kind of wave that we see rolling across America and the world is very real. It is in many ways irreversible. And so it is a big deal. I mean, sometimes I think there is a lot of hand-wringing and pining for kind of a way it used to be before all the madness or whatever, and that's probably not very true. It was always a little bit mad, and we were just afraid to kind of look at it in the eye.
Oh, yeah.
So I feel like some of the bad news is sort of toothpaste out of the tube. It was always there, but now we're confronted with it, and we just don't know how to get back in.
Great. That's fun. So I'm going to start this off. I mean, this has already started. I'm going to keep pretty much all that in. But I want to go back and talk about when you were a young kid, and like I think again through this conversation of like hearing how you grew up in high school and stuff, like what are those things that kind of opened your eyes to things like this to lead you to having this career and doing the band and everything, and just like doing shit your own way, because a lot of people kind of fall off that path sometimes. Like they were in the scene and then they were like, okay, that was fun, now I'm gonna go do something different. But it's cool talking to people where they're like, no, I kept up with it and I just tried to mold my direction.
No, I hear you. And I would say for me, like so much of the product of punk music was the process, and it's, how I arrived there. And just being a half Indian kid, growing up in very white bread suburban Chappaqua, Westchester, New York, I'm sure many of your readers would be familiar, was you just weren't ever going to be part of the club. So I think that my love for music and for loud rock music developed independently of my sort of understanding of what punk was or could be, because punk was so much more of a means. It was so much more of a thing where I just, as a regular person, as me, as not Mr. Cool, as not Mr. Jock, as not Mr. Whatever, had access and had influence. And it's, I mean, we're starting off the interview exactly correctly with what you're asking, I guess, because there was something sort of inherently political in a kind of self-organizing, self-determination way about a punk show that really jumped out and appealed to me. But it's funny. I would say, like, I didn't really, until I was in a place, and that was less high school and even more college, where I could like have influence to exert some element of control on that politics, to actually feel like I was having impact, making a difference. It became hypercharged for me to want to do it. So what may have been the aesthetics of loud music growing up that may have sort of had a whiff of politics, we always loved the Dead Kennedys, a lot of those kind of bands growing up. And again, this is a Westchester thing. I think it was like, just as an aside, the Dead Kennedys was the one band name that could offend our parents, who were all obviously very liberal people. Like we weren't growing up in conservative small town. You had to work a little harder to piss your parents off. The Dead Kennedys fit the bill. They were like, that's kind of offensive. You're like, yeah, it is. That kind of had the whiff of satire, and that kind of politics to us was, it was a hangover from the kind of Reagan stuff, which, although, we all may have bloomed in our scene in the 90s, we were definitely formed in the 80s. And I think that kind of idea of stencils, resistance, kind of a little more gritty and a little less glossy. I keep leaning on Gen X a lot, but it's what I've been thinking about a lot lately because I'm of the opinion now that we may not have a Gen X president. And I don't know that that's sad. I don't know that means anything, but like we may, like we have with so many other things, just be skipped over. And I think in the kind of late 80s, it did have that kind of resistance, anti-Reagan, stencil, kind of very harsh political satire kind of feel. And that transitioned into much more of a, I don't know, kind of cultural expression of maybe alienation, loneliness. I'm trying to think of like whatever you describe the screeching weasel sort of revolution as being.
Yeah.
But for me, it became less like just about what the music was and more about what the scene was and being an organizer of the scene and learning about how to set up a show and the fact that punk rock was an alternative economy. Like in every town, there was somebody working at Kinko's, figuring it all. It had its own rules. And to me, this was a real revelation where it was, this is less something that I'm into and more something I want to do.
Well, I think it gave us power to start doing things on our own, where I think a lot of us wanted that. And some people saw that. They're going, wait a minute, this is my stepping stone to actually, doing the DIY thing, like in my own life.
Doing a thing.
Yeah, like I don't have to wait for my parents to drive me somewhere. I have to wait for my parents to say yes. Like I could just start doing this shit without anyone's permission. And depending on what it was, like I never really got in the whole political scene. It just never stuck with me. So, but I think that punk rock is, I mean, obviously it's broken up back in the scene, and to this day, there's people that are writing about politics, bands writing about politics, they're just writing about life, or they're writing about relationships. And it was just some angst of this is what I truly feel, and I need some way of getting it out. But it'd be interesting because I would just go to the shows to play shows or watch bands, and then there'd be bands with pamphlets on their tables with their merch, and it would open I'm like, oh, interesting. And it'd be, if it was the Weaker Thans going around, they'd have everything about
totally
being vegans and vegetarian. Yeah, because they were really, I think they maybe had like 2 shirts for their merch, and all the rest of it was information that they really wanted people to get.
And it was so simple. They didn't have like a very like, sometimes when you're, landing in a kind of like hardcore anarcho-syndicalist punk rock group, you don't exactly know what you're supposed to learn. You're like, okay, it seems like the Americans doing something bad in Nicaragua, like,
Yeah.
But like with the Weaker Thans, it was very clear what they wanted. Just try it for a week. Here's your PETA starter kit. Like this is our I'm talking now as a politics guy, right? But their call to action was just so clear and such a simple takeaway that was able to take a lot more than maybe from like Iconoclast, where they have a very complex worldview that they're trying to explain.
But that's the thing, is like you have to have a very specific focus, and that makes it a lot easier for people to get it. If you are like, we're going to fight everything, you're like, well, that's a lot.
But I don't feel that different. To the way that you did, right? Like I feel like, politics, like punk had this political aesthetic for people who were my age, but it was just an aesthetic. And it wasn't until there was this kind of DIY economy that became something I wanted to engage with. And when I engaged with it, I was perfectly willing to do so in kind of any way. Like ended up forming a band with good friends kind of around, mutual aesthetic that we all liked. But if I had joined another band that had been a pop punk band that were like, we want you to play bass and write some lyrics, and they were doing okay, I probably would have just said yes and done that.
Yeah.
Because it was just being able to participate was so much more important than how I was participating.
Yeah.
I'm like half Indian kid in Chappaqua. I know nobody's going to give me a record deal. At the end of the day, I actually didn't know then what I know now, which is that Freddie Mercury was Indian, one of our greatest Indian rock stars we didn't know about.
Was it really?
But
I didn't know that.
It was, yeah, right? Isn't that cool? So
wow.
I did have someone to look up to. I just didn't realize it.
Yeah, you just didn't know.
But in my head, it was like, look, they're never going to let you do this. If there's a way you can do this yourself and sneak through the door, you owe it to yourself to do that if you love music.
Yeah, actually, well, speaking of that, it's a good segue. Like, so going back even more, like when you were a little kid, like what song or band what song that you heard just sparked your interest into liking music, and then how did that evolve into liking punk rock?
It's funny, like growing up, I didn't listen to a lot of music outside of my parents' car or in our house, and so that was mostly classical or like the Beatles or anything random that would come along on NPR. And so I loved music, and I would listen to these things over and over again. And I found myself in classical very drawn to, the big ones, the big, heavy, loud stuff, Beethoven, this kind of thing. And then when it came to like the Beatles, I found myself being drawn to kind of, for lack of a better term, their heavier songs. Like I actually thought that these were interesting. And so like, when I first heard something like Black Sabbath, I immediately thought of things like Helter Skelter. I was like, oh, I get what they're doing. They're doing this. And so I had a sort of a very non-top 40 introduction to music. And in many ways, I sort of started with the Beatles and then just almost studying on my own. And again, pre-internet, would like go to garage sales and just sort of buy things almost academic. Like if the guide said that the Flying Burrito Brothers were an interesting band from the mid-'70s, then by gum, I was going to listen to a Flying Burrito Brothers album. And doing that gave me like a really good like background in sort of all different kinds of popular music, and kind of allowed me to approach it with like, I like this song, even though it's a big popular radio song, because I wasn't confronted with it on the radio. So I was listening to NPR, and I can't remember the program, but Jello Biafra was doing spoken word about the Frankenchrist album and about the artwork and what had happened, and he was so funny and the whole thing. And and then they played some of the music, and to me it was a real revelation. I was like, what is this? Because what was so great about it was that the aesthetic of it wasn't just this veneer put on top. It wasn't like, oh, Led Zeppelin likes big drums. It was like the point of what the music is, which is funny and sarcastic and really righteous, is actually coming out through the way these instruments sound. And it was an amazing revelation to me. It sounds so simple saying it to you now, but for me, it was just that sort of NPR introduction. And part of that is just so funny because it's sort of coming through proper gatekeepers. So I think it kind of shows you what kind of an academically oriented kid I was. Like, your parents are the gatekeepers of music. They like these things. They say these things are okay. You respect that naturally. For me, NPR was another thing like that. It was like, this may sound like noise, but it's being served to you by an institution that you respect.
Right.
So how does that make you feel about it? And for me, it sort of did. It was like, oh, okay, there's more to this than just the noise. But it wasn't a natural inclination of like walking by and hearing kids play and being like, what is that? Or your best friend start a band. We were always starting bands, right from, 6th, 7th grade when I was first trying to learn how to play the bass. And it was like every other band in every other high school. You're a cover band, you play some Jimi Hendrix, if you can.
Yeah.
Now I'm trying to remember how we pulled that off. But you play a lot of classic rock, you play the things that you're hearing about. And then either there are those older kid bands who sort of teach you the the next level up, or there's not, and you just don't go in that direction. And for me, there wasn't that kind of generation of older bands.
What did you feel drew you to that? Like,
Oh, it was just funny because you were talking about Binghamton before,
yeah,
which was a
yeah.
place that had a great punk scene in the '90s, and it was kind of like, why, right? Like, yeah, there were arts bands coming down from Cornell and other places, but you're like, why is this place special? And it was because in this period I'm talking about, the late '80s to the early '90s, there was one band called Alienation, who worked so hard to just make sure that the scene stayed alive. And it wasn't about their particular brand of crusty punk. It was about inviting all different kinds of bands in, making sure it all happened. And like, there were a lot of folks, I think in that period of time, who really just kept stuff alive because there weren't a lot of older bands for younger bands to look up to.
What year was that band around?
Alienation, I mean, they were, one of them died recently, I think, but they were active through like the late '90s. And were kind of a late '80s band. Some of them ended up moving to Toronto, but Alienation, and I think there's an Alienation in every one of these towns who just gives a shit.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. They had to open a door. They had to open people's eyes up to that stuff. So they'd be so excited about it, and they'd put on shows
And
and get people
pretend to
there.
like these bands. We were all terrible, right? And they had to like be excited that there were 5 little kid bands who could barely play and be
But
like,
they
y'all
could see
rad.
it. But I think sometimes you could see there was potential, or you were just excited that they were just playing music. You didn't give a fuck what it sounded like, and I like that was pretty cool. Because like if I go to a show now and if I see a band I don't like, I'm just like, ugh. I I try to like I'll try to give it like what can I get out of this that is or what positive thing can I get out of this? Be like, okay, like they did this well or something. But sometimes if I just listen to music, I'm just
It's
like,
speed dating, man. Right?
yeah,
You're there for
it's
20
true.
seconds. You're like, this ain't gonna work. All right, we ain't going to a second record.
It's
You know?
it's a great point. But I've been blown away by some bands that were started off complete shit, and no one's great when they start, but then all of a sudden later on you're going, wow, where did this come from?
Yeah, no, and I like to think that we're an example of that. Some of the very early iFarm stuff is very different than where we ended up.
Well, how did you guys get together? Like, well, first of all, did you go to a show first and then start the band, or did you start the band and that led you going to local shows?
I was going to shows as for the music and for the social aspects of it
This
for
is
at
in
least a couple of
Chappaqua?
years.
This is in Chappaqua where you
For a
grew up?
couple of years in Chappaqua.
Okay.
A lot of that was not in Chappaqua. You'd have to go to other parts of
Yeah,
Westchester.
yeah, I was gonna say.
Yonkers was a high point. But and sort of and it was very much tied in with the skateboarding scene. So it's like, what are we doing today? We're skateboarding, which meant I wasn't skateboarding because I was terrible and still am. I was
Oh, okay.
filming skateboarding, and I got much better at filming for that. So I do want to give punk rock some credit there too.
Yeah.
And you end up someplace, right? And it's the early 90s. So you might end up at a rave, you might end up at a punk show. For me, I was like one of the punkier kids. Like that was where we wanted to end up. We did not want to have to end up at the rave necessarily, but it wasn't for sure what was going to happen at any given time. I would say it was more in college where I kind of was able to like, you form your own social clique and decide the people you're going to spend time with. And I sort of made a much more concerted effort that the punk scene was something that I wanted to be part of, wanted to be instrumental in helping, make much bigger, because in Ithaca it was very small then.
Mm.
And so the kind of process of rebuilding that up was in many ways a second sort of entrance into the scene, but my real one, the one that really stuck.
How old are you at this point?
17 when I go to college.
Okay.
And we formed the band right away. So actually formed the band when I was 17. And that was, a kid who lived I was in the music dorm at Cornell, which sounds like which was great. And they did have, obviously, like many facilities for people who are playing all kinds of music. But I want to be totally honest with you. What it was kind of the rock and roll dorm. And it was because they had a huge PA system. Not only did they have a huge PA system, do you know whose PA system this was? It was Manowar's,
What?
the seminal, thrash metal band, who are actually from upstate New York, and their guitar player, who's famously the loudest guitar player who ever lived or whatever. So we actually had Manowar's PA that you could use no matter what, so free practice space that was college sponsored.
Jesus.
And we had the idea of turning that practice space into an actual show space. It hadn't occurred to the administration because they're like, why would you put a show on so small, not knowing that that's what punk shows are? And so this actually became a huge staple of how iFarm grew, and also how the Ithaca punk scene kind of formed, at least around Cornell, for free, where it would sound okay. Like your band was going to sound okay.
Yeah.
Because we had Manowar's PA.
I don't think we ever played in Ithaca. We'd always stop at like Binghamton, and the furthest.
I
north
would
of
be
Ithaca.
so surprised if Dave from Thirsty never brought you over. Did that never happen?
I mean, I could be wrong.
Is it too late? Were you guys too young?
Well, let's see. In 98, I was 19. So Lanemeyer started, like, we were a different band before we made Lanemeyer, and we were like 14 when we started that. So 14 or 15 and we started that shit. And then I think it was like 18. Yeah, I was 18 when Lanemeyer started. And that was like 97. 98.
Yeah, so there would have been a good scene going on, but I think the people who would have been most into you actually were like the people who did the zine. If you remember Dave Brown. Where were Thirsty from? They were from Summit, New Jersey, or Berkeley Heights, or some of them were from Summit and some of them were from Berkeley Heights. They then became the UFOs, and Dave went off to worked at Spin. He was always like the punk guy who was like just on the edge of like actual rock and roll journalism.
Okay, and you guys did a split with them. Yeah, because I'm on your Bandcamp. I'm on your Bandcamp page.
I didn't know we had a Bandcamp page.
Oh, really?
They were kind of Not that anyone. This is the scene in Ithaca. This is the scene in everywhere. But in Ithaca, we had this like, a really cool thing in that we had these kind of three centers of power. We had the free PA at Cornell.
Yep.
We had this person who had these hooks into the music industry at Ithaca College just across the hill. And then in the actual town scene, we actually had one scene, which is why Ithaca was strong. Like we didn't have a different town versus gown scene. You had the kind of kids who had been making it happen for decades, the kind of people who Bailey Nation had been nurturing, and were kind of just a built-in punk rock DIY infrastructure for what was happening in town.
That's awesome. Yeah, you weren't that far from. How far away was Ithaca from where you grew up? Like an hour or so? A couple hours?
No, 4 hours.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Westchester is down the road and is kind of New York City suburbs.
So you guys started iFarm when you were 17 and going into college.
Yeah, and in college, yeah.
Okay, in college. So you start that. You start doing shows at Ithaca. Did you go all 4 years through Cornell?
Yeah. Yeah, although halfway through we started, our new guitar player was someone who actually who was from New Jersey, actually, Jeremy Curtin. And then we switched drummers to someone who's living in Washington, D.C. But Ithaca was just a great place to form a band out. This is what, like, every band needs to hear, so hopefully this is the part that they all skip to. It's like you all want to move to Brooklyn, but, like, that is the death of you being a band.
Yeah.
You need, like, a medium-sized town that you can actually be a big fish in. A place where when you come back after a tour, people are excited to see you. They replenish your coffers by having some shows. Like, you need that kind of support. And so Ithaca was perfect because we were able to go to all these other places in upstate New York and guarantee wherever we showed up that you can have a show back in Ithaca. So just making all these friends everywhere and always having that guarantee, yeah, you can play at Cornell, it'll be great, eat at the food hall, you'll love it. Invite people and have a real tangible thing you could give them. This was more than half the battle.
Okay, so kind of like, what was like the vision of the band when you guys got together? It was just like, okay, like I'm going to school. I want to set up shows here. We could play some music. Or were you thinking like, oh, cool, man, like on our breaks we can get in a van and we can go on tour, or like I don't know, like what was that conversation like?
I think for me, this was the first time that I was putting together a band, that I was putting together the band. Like, not like it was me, but like it wasn't joining a band. It was like people coming together to form a band. Mm-hmm. And so this was the first time that a band formed with the intention of, and we are going to tour, and we are going to play shows, and it is going to be fun. And it's not just going to be about our friends. It's going to be people we don't know. And we kind of made that as a real decision. And it was like, okay, how do we play in Binghamton? How do we do this?
How did you guys balance that out? Where, what did you play on weekends, or did you just wait until you were on break? Like, how did that all work out?
Weekends, break. No, we spent a lot of time thinking about the band. The band became, a big part of our social life. And I think that's what also helped us be successful in Ithaca, was like, we were having the parties at our band's house, like stuff like that. And so you could sort of always be thinking about the band. And I would say, like, it won't be surprising now that I'm this sort of, maniacal political person, but like, I took that shit kind of seriously. Like, if we were having a party and we needed to talk to 6 people about getting 6 shows, like, I made sure we talked to those 6 people.
What do you mean? Like, you planned it out and said, okay, like, there's a strategy here. I want to make sure that, so if you had like a goal, you're like, I'm going to fucking accomplish this mission. Like, there's it's a party, but yeah, hobnob. Okay.
Yeah, I'll be like, I'm going to invite Jerry. Why are you inviting Jerry? Because Jerry knows Bob, and Bob says we can play at blah blah blah. Yeah, but Jerry and Bob are annoying. I'm inviting them. Like, I would just be like, that doesn't matter to me. Like,
I didn't realize how calculated you were back then.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds horrible and calculated when I'm saying it now.
No, it doesn't sound horrible at all. It's just it's interesting.
It's just it was, yeah. No, and if we're really going into like a run, pre-marketing, marketing a run.
Let's break it down.
There was Zed Nosh was the name of this music magazine at Cornell, and a good friend of ours, Mikey, was going to write an article on iFarm. And I think he actually put this in the article. He was like, what do you want me to call the article? And I was like, call it iFarm the worst band ever. And he was like, well, you're not. And I was like, I should actually send you this article. It's funny. I think I can probably find someone to send me a copy of it.
But did it rip you guys apart, or did it like say, no, we actually like this band and here's why?
Somewhere in between. Like, I was the interviewer and I was being very disagreeable because I wanted it to kind of, again, have this kind of like attitude.
Interesting.
And so So it was kind of kept asking stuff, and I kind of kept ignoring it. But a lot of it was about, we were very, very fast, and that was usually the topic of conversation. And this was the kind of one aesthetic we all shared, because we wanted our band to be extremely fast, and we were, to our credit.
Well, I think that I think I read that too. You guys were like the fastest pop punk band, is how the people would reference you.
Totally.
Yeah.
And to be totally fair, I think there's people who came and didn't know our songs or care that much. We're like, these guys are going to play really fast. They're going to start and stop at the same time. We're going to applaud. We're all going to buy the other band's records because their music makes more sense. But we respect that they are the fastest band. And frankly, that was good enough for us. But like, it was the only joint aesthetic, I would say, when we all came together. You know, I was somebody who liked kind of abrasive stuff as well as kind of the, I mean, this was, 1992, 93. So as well as kind of the stuff that was coming, I'm trying to think if it was before Fat Records. What was the Epitaph? The stuff that was coming out of Epitaph at the time. As well as like Black Flag and Dead Kennedy, things like this. There were other folks, like our guitar player, who was super into like NoFX and Tool, right? Like, and these were his two kind of aesthetics. And so it was interesting that we did draw on kind of a lot of different stuff. Our first drummer was a senior, Jaime. He was great when we were all freshmen. And he was really into like Faith No More and like, White Zombie and a lot of really interesting kind of metal that, influenced me too. It didn't just go one way where I was like, the happy young kid who made everybody do what I thought was good. It was like, he'd be like, no, listen to this part of Angel Dust. And he'd be like, well, this is a really good record. He'd be like, yeah, I know. This is a really, really good record.
Did you guys try to structure your songs in a very specific way? Like, did you take time and say, like, let's really break these parts down and add some intricacy here? Or try your, or did you just go like, no, we're just going to just go stop, beginning, end?
I would say that there are two phases in the band aesthetic that are completely distinct. And that has to do with our drummer, Josh, coming in, because he has, he was in Funbox. He's now in Chilton. To people who know his drumming, he's a known quantity. Like, he is just a very interesting musician. So it used to be that if you wrote the song, it was your job to bring the song in fairly finished. And if someone had a great idea, that was great. And we were always up for whatever, and we always enjoyed practicing together, and at least a few times a week. Like, we were a real working band. With Josh coming in, songwriting became a thing where you brought in parts. You didn't wait till you had the whole song, because we were often going to try to fuse parts or add third parts or kind of deliberately make it more interesting. And I think people even now looking back will be like, oh yeah, you're the band that switches parts all the time. I would say that really started with Sincerely Robots and with Josh Carothers coming in on drums.
Were you guys ever on a label, or did you just put the stuff out on your own?
We the first thing we put out was on Crap Records, which was Carly Guarino, who lives in Ithaca, but was from Westchester, so we knew her well. Her label, and then she did our first record as a co-release with Creep Records, who you'll recall out of Westchester, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I interviewed Eric.
I'm sure you've interviewed any number of Creep Record alums also. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a huge, huge thing, and so that brought us into contact with folks like Plow United, who we ended up doing a lot of touring with and actually becoming very good friends with to this day. I'll text Joel probably 2 or 3 times today.
Oh, no shit. That's awesome.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. He's still brilliant.
Wait, real quick. Was he the one that, Brian introduced or connected us? Was that?
I don't doubt that either. Brian and I talk a lot about politics these days because he is he is such an indicator of smart liberal voter, guy with punk background who just brings that kind of attitude of, I don't believe this, but I know I want to do something positive. And we have these really good Facebook chats about what he thinks is going on, what I think are going on. All the Plow guys. Sean, he's still lighting fires with math in Oregon. It is funny, kind of Trump has brought a lot of people's kind of inner politician back out for people who are kind of not caring much about it. And I think especially with a lot of our punk folks from the 90s and stuff, it's really hit hard.
What do you think would have happened with you guys if, and I'm kind of jumping around here, but if you guys were a band and today, I know you said you never broke up, but if it was easy for you to get back together, but let's take it back to when you were a band. How do you think that would have changed your sound or maybe your songs if you were in this climate?
I hadn't thought about it before, but I have the exact answer for you.
Perfect.
Which is and it happened to all art, not just punk. But after September 11th, right, it wasn't just that Anti-Flag pretended they weren't a band and like went hiding or whatever happened. Like it was like irony was stripped out of the scene entirely, right? Like even the year before, you would have played with bands, called the McVeys or, like
Yeah.
that had like edgy, fun, exciting, destructive, slightly violent names. All of a sudden that was stripped out. I would say it happened in horror movies, like kind of as well. Like all of a sudden all the horror movies became like really ironic. And so I think like what I see as an opportunity now, and if I was in a band and if we were still actively playing, would be to actually reclaim that aesthetic. And by the way, this would not be popular. Like this would be a thing that people would fight about in zines, like in terms of political correctness and things like this. But I do think that the only way to kind of defeat the simple Trumpian, seductive, easy, you don't need any facts message is with some very dark, very ironic stuff.
Interesting. So like, because I know back then we would play some shows, and I talked about this a couple times. There was one we played in like, I think it was like Tennessee or something, or maybe it was like Louisville, Kentucky. But there was these skinheads, and they came into the show, and they were dancing around, kicking people, being annoying. And the guy got in my face, and he was like, "Say that one more time, I'll beat your face." I was like, "Dude, I'm like 140 pounds and 5'11". Like,
if you feel like you need to beat my face, that's gonna happen for you.
I was like, that's not gonna happen. But I can imagine if you guys were like touring around, and there were like there was like that crowd. I feel like that would be way more aggressive now, because it's like there's people have a stance.
And we used to get in fights a little bit, like not in fights. I am like you. I'm a small person who is not equipped.
But from the stage, you just talk shit, right?
Yeah, or even get people in your face afterwards, and some of that was like America stuff. Like, what the fuck was this band? I used to make fun of them all the time, and then finally we played with them, and they were like, "You talk a lot of shit about us," and I was like, "Yeah, you guys are Republicans." They were like an honest to goodness Republican hardcore band. So I lent them my bass amp, which had an American flag upside down on it, and they insisted on putting it the right way before they played and like saying something obnoxious about it. And I was like, "Y'all, that's cool." Like, I would have lent you the amp no matter what. But like, you kind of talked a lot of shit. I didn't talk a lot of shit about it. Like, and just sort of, but they were like, "Yeah, but you're anti-America. How does that work? You guys are being anti-American." And we're like, "No," just having the conversations that you would try to have now. You're like, "No, we love this country. We want it to be a little better and a little less bigoted." And when a bunch of tall white kids are playing hardcore in front of gigantic American flags, like to us, that feels a little nationalist in the wrong way.
Yeah.
And like, and I think in that same way that like, well, this will get me into trouble. But do you remember all that year where all of a sudden every band was a Christian band because it helped them get ahead a little bit and their parents didn't mind and would give them like touring money?
Yeah.
It was like this one, like all of a sudden this one summer of touring, we were like, this show seems weird. Everybody's really nice, but okay, it's another Christian show. Gotcha. Okay, that's cool. I think there's a world in which there are like Trumpians, Republican punk bands in basements, and I don't know who they are, and I don't know the music, and I'm too old and out of touch to like research this.
Yeah.
Effectively. But I do think that this kind of transgressive, are we having fun, are we racist, it's not entirely clear, Pepe the Frog kind of stuff is probably very alive and well in a very young and healthy punk scene in places probably like Orange County, California. I just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine what Anti-Flag is going through now. This last like 4 years, just traveling around. Because I mean, they're still doing their shit, but I'm sure they show up in towns and.
Yeah, I was really glad to see them back out. I know that sort of it had been like a hard kind of atmosphere for them for a while. They were another band who had a big influence on iFarm. Our first big tour that we did, where we like left town and went to cities and had lots of people there, was tagging along with an Anti-Flag tour, and that was only because they were like, "Sure, email everyone who's on our tour and tell them that you want to play the show," and that we said that it was cool.
How'd you guys get hooked up with that?
They said that, and so
did you just know them from playing like a show in Ithaca, or how did you connect with them?
They came through Binghamton like everybody does, and I said, I think we were like, "We can do you one better. Why don't you all come up to Ithaca?"
Ah.
And I think they really liked kind of our more slightly collegiate, reading books kind of scene thing. It's also very, very funny. So like telling people that we're on tour with Anti-Flag was like a big, big step forward for us.
Oh, yeah.
took that to the next level when we were on quote unquote tour with Anti-Flag, and then we played with Propagandhi,
Whoa.
which was they used to always do 2 shows. Remember, they weren't playing the States for a while, and they would do 2 shows on their way to the airport before they would fly to Europe. And one was always in St. Louis, and one was always someplace else. So we were on the St. Louis show at the High Point Cafe. Fabulous place to have a show. And no one knew who we were or why we were on the show. But again, it's all politics. By the time you're done talking to everyone, this is what I would love to do. We actually played after Anti-Flag and before Propagandhi, like the sweet spot.
Jesus.
And I still don't remember exactly what it was that got us in there, but you'd have to just be on your toes and have a bunch of explanations about, who exactly you guys were and why you were here. And I used to love that. It felt like operating without a net, Wait,
okay, go on. Yeah.
Good one, right?
Jesus Christ.
No, we should take a step back and admire my handiwork there.
Yeah,
because,
well
yes, that's
done.
right. There were like 5 bands who played, and the 4th of the 5th one was iFarm. Propagandhi did not like us. They thought we were kind of super bratty, super brash. From stage, Propagandhi actually said something about us because we were a very bratty band. We used to invite people to throw things, spit, do whatever you wanted to do, like your own sort of self-expression. And that wasn't the way they liked things to be. So they definitely said something nasty about us and about like punk rock. I forget exactly what it was. And we were actually okay with it. But we were all staying at a house later, and I forget if it was Pat or if it was Andy or if it was Justin. I think it was Pat. Was just talking to Chris, not even in a mad way, but he was like, those guys like love you. Those guys think you're like the best band, and you totally shouted them on stage. But no, we were just super happy to have played. We also talked our way into, speaking of talking our way into things, this was a good one. We were in Canada finishing up our 110 shows in 110 days tour, which is still the high point of, I believe, my DIY success. Like, that is not easy to book.
No.
Like, we did an entire summer plus, and we ended up in Canada. And again, we had these shows, and more than one of them were with the Queers. And so finally I was like, this seems like an opportunity. So I just told like somebody, I was like, well, we're on tour with the Queers. And they're like, oh yeah, I've seen you guys been playing with them. And I was like, yeah, so we're supposed to be on these 3 shows also. And they were like, oh yeah, of course. So they'd add us to these shows. And Joe Queer, who is not, you have to get up very early in the morning to fool this guy, like knew exactly what was happening, knew exactly what I had done. And so whenever the promoter was like, yeah, we love the iFarm guys. We're having the best time on tour with them. I handle the money for both our bands, so just pay us for both, and I'll make sure they get what they're supposed to get. And would look me strict in the eyes as he would like peel off a few 20s, and be like, I hope this gets you gas. You're not supposed to be here,
Wow. That's fucking hilarious, dude.
And my favorite room, if we're talking about this kind of like, just talking your way into thing, my favorite room in all of punk rock, and in fact, probably all of politics, because it's deeply, deeply political, is the room in Berkeley. Oh, God, why can't I remember the name of what's the DIY space in Berkeley?
Gilman?
Gilman Street. Is, after, of course, after talking who should get paid and why, explain what you want to happen and why you think that that's just. And there aren't very many times in your life where there are no pre-prescribed rules about how something is supposed to go, so you actually are just applying your worldview to it. And I always just thought it was this amazing, fascinating place to be.
That was at Gilman?
At Gilman, yeah. So at the end of the show, the whoever put on the show invites all the bands back, and you look at the money and you talk about it,
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool. Wow.
Like, I remember once looking like they had, for whatever happened that night, they had an enormous box of change, right? It was like $500 and change or whatever. And I was just like, listen, we obviously could use the money, but I'm letting you know now, like, iFarm cannot be responsible for that amount. We would just lose that money. So you should just like subtract that, like just pretend that we had it and we lost it, because it's like useless to hand it to us. It's just stuff like that, and like that isn't a rule you would ever make, but like I said the first thing first. It was like, okay, so iFarm's not taking any of the change. I still don't think they should forfeit all of their profit from that. So, and then someone else would speak on your behalf, or you speak on, I remember one time I spoke on this Italian band's behalf who had played and then moved on, and they were on tour in America, and they clearly didn't know what was happening. You would encounter these bands from time to time, right? Because it's different. You're an American band, you're in Europe, there's infrastructure, there's people to take care of you. Like when you're like some Italian band, like driving through Arkansas and you don't know what's going on, like I always felt bad for these bands. And they had just left without getting paid because They hadn't been officially on the bill. And I remember we were all like, hey, can someone track down this band? Is anyone playing anywhere near them? Like, we need to get them some money because they are literally going to starve to death. Like, they have no idea what's happening. And so we did that. It was a decision that we made, and it was, an abnormal decision that you wouldn't have put in the bylines of a punk club, but this kind of freedom. This is the good stuff. This is the real shit.
What were you guys like as a band, like internally when you were on the road? Were you guys getting along, or like what was that
Mostly
like?
getting along. I mean, obviously, you have fights.
Yeah.
But like we're all big nerds, so like a lot of books. We would get very sick of listening to like shitty demo tapes as well as like our favorite records in the van. So we started listening to learning language tapes. We learned Russian one tour,
Get the fuck
which
out.
actually was super fun. And then we would listen to a lot of like 80s pop music, which I think is really like metal, punk, and pure 80s pop. Unironically, it's just this is sort of what I associate music as being. And no, we didn't fight much. And I would say like we had a good reputation this way, especially amongst women in the scene. And I actually have had time to sort of think about this more, like kind of post Me Too, because there was a lot of that going around, and like bands and accusations and people, and I don't think the scene, any of us, handled it the way that we should have in retrospect.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of not believing people. And people would always say, we like it when you all stay at our house because you all read books and listen to Cyndi Lauper and are totally like non-threatening. And sort of we just had this reputation as being like a very non-threatening band that was totally chill to stay like with your mom. They'd be like, oh yeah, they'll drink coffee with her and talk about like Kierkegaard. It'll be fine. Like, so we were sort of like a very popular band with people's parents, with people's girlfriends.
That's so funny. I mean, I guess my perspective was that if a band was nuts on stage, they were just crazy all the time. But I felt like from getting to know bands that were, or just had like an aggressive sound or whatever, they were pretty just chill people. And so the aggression came out in the music of the stage show. And afterwards, they're like, okay, that was good.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm gonna go chill with a book. How'd you guys get hooked up with the Operation Cliff Clavin split? I remember that band. They used to, I think they still are touring.
Yeah, so we played with them like back in their original incarnation in Bellingham, Washington.
Okay.
Actually. No, that's not even true. No, it was, it was normal stuff. It was going through Indiana, obviously, like everybody else. You exchange names, you exchange dates. When you guys are going to come back to Ithaca. And we kept in touch with all of them. So we would just like see them when we were in Bellingham, Washington, where Frankie ended up. I remember he hooked us up with the Weakerthans show there. A bunch of other stuff. And we were just always friends. And I think we had some of that. And it's ironic now because I've heard things, that like non-threatening vibe when we're both bands like that. But we didn't do the split. The split was the idea of Wells, Tipley, Traffic Violation Records. I reached back into my brain and he was very adamant about it. He was like, no, you all, it's not about the aesthetic. It's about the politics. You guys are like the two big DIY bands.
Yeah.
And it's funny, that was our reputation. I think that, we've done all the right punk rock things and told all the right people to fuck off, which, was the right thing to do. It's hard to say. But we would also just do little things, I think, that they would do too, that were kind of like in-your-face DIY. Like we used to make shirts at the shows,
Wow.
which was super fun. And actually we sold a lot of shirts, like you just have, people are saying, well, what are you doing? Oh, I'm making a shirt. Oh, how does that work? Like
Wow.
Sometimes you get people to make their own shirts and then buy them. And then if you remember, my favorite thing that they did was they had their journal of all the free fast food that they would get by like lying to companies. They would just like pull into like a Burger King and be like, oh, we lost all this, give us all this for free, and they would, and they would be like, stole another $30 from the man today. Here's how we did it.
Like the guide of taking from the man, just do these tricks, these hacks. Like how that label said, like you guys are the two, you and Operation Cliff Clayton should get together because your sound is similar, or what you're saying is similar. Like, did you ever feel you're being pigeonholed in an area that you were like, I'm just kind of digging this, or you're like, yeah, this is who we are. That sounds about right.
Yeah.
Like, did you find it was like kind of hindering on like your songwriting? You're like, well, our sound is this, so we have to write these songs, or we're just naturally like, no, we enjoy writing songs like this. Let's just keep going.
No, look, here's what I will say about this. And like every band wants to think that they are this unique snow. And so when people were like, oh, this sounds like the logical conclusion of like, what happened if Fat Records bands kind of like, practiced a lot and got real angry about politics. And like to us, I think that would feel really reductive. We'd be like, no, that's not it. That's not our thing. But that's sort of, it is as accurate as anything else. And the thing that we would have wanted to replace it with is, again, this hopelessly complicated, we're so unique, and we're this, we're thrash, metal, skate, punk, rock, just like having it all in there. And it's just not always fair.
What was the last album you guys put out? Was it a 4 in 2006?
It was called iPhone 4.
iPhone 4. Okay.
Yes, and I will say one of my regrets in that we may not be putting out a new album anytime soon is that I had the name picked out for the next record, which was going to be 4 again. How good would that have been?
That's great.
Because it was the beginning of a joke. We did the setup and not the punchline. Because the joke is that every band has a fourth record that they call 4, right?
Yep.
And it's not funny until we actually get to make the joke. Anyway, we'll make the joke someday.
See, what I appreciate about your marketing sense is I have the same exact style where everyone follows this path on just how to do shit. And even when you said like the article you had written, and it's like, what do you want to call it? You're like, iFarm, the worst band. You have a very disruptive way of getting people to stop and pay attention, because it doesn't have to be this big thing. It could be as simple as just a line or just a word. And people go out of their way to do these giant marketing campaigns where they're worried about the color and the imagery and all that shit. But it's like, if you just do it just slightly different, it makes people go, oh, wow, that's so different. You're like, yeah, because everyone else is trying to do this. Everyone else is following what everyone else is fucking doing. And
let me give you a great example from politics, or from my work in politics. So,
yeah.
I took thousands and thousands of pictures for Bernie Sanders in 2016. And look, it's 2016. Like, everyone's phone takes pictures that are just as good as your pictures in many, many ways. And they are, in many ways, having as much access to this candidate as you are. And so our underlying aesthetic for our photos for, like, Bernie's Instagram feed were gritty, have lots of digital noise in there, have things be a little out of focus sometimes, use a lot of lens flare, anything that could just show you imperfections in the product that make it different than what you see when you're scrolling through it. And in so many ways, that is just my exact experience of the aesthetic of punk rock, where, again, it wasn't something that I immediately was drawn to out of its own noisy self. It was seeing that it was this really effective tool that worked really effectively. I used effective twice there, but you hear what I'm saying.
I see you have good marketing. You want people to really pay attention.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's it. That's what I love. It's like, how do you, it's not even just to stand out. Sure, there's a way where you're going, I want to stand out, or there is a method to the madness because I want people to listen to our band or want them to pay attention. But there's also like kind of a smart-ass genuineness to it too, where you're just trying to make yourself laugh in the process.
Totally. That's right.
And I think when you do that, other people get the joke. And when you're trying too hard, it's like when people try to rip off the Geico commercials. Geico just was like,
it's
hey,
the worst.
Yeah, but in the beginning Geico ones, they were like, hey man, just go to fucking town. And some of them, there's some of them are kind of crappy, but some of them are still pretty fucking funny. And other people are like, okay, well, now we're going to follow that. Oh, look, we're cool and hip. It's like, no, you don't get it, because the core of what you're doing is, it's based on like money. I mean, obviously it's marketing, but it's not based on making yourself laugh or making yourself go, this is fucking great. You're
starting from somebody else's ceiling, which is also a hard place to like try to get growth from,
Exactly.
rather than your own, which is the floor.
Yeah, and I think like from what I can kind of get from just the path that you've gone on and just iFarm in general, it's like, it seemed like you guys were just kind of like, I don't know exactly, or metaphorically, like, we're just trying to make ourselves laugh, or we're trying to just
it's a really kind and happy way to put it. That makes me feel good, because I do think about like, hours we would spend practicing, and we did just make each other laugh so much. This was like, the glue that keeps a lot of romantic relationships together, but this was the glue that kept iFarm as a band for over a decade. It's just, we made each other think, we made each other laugh, we challenged each other to be better, and it was just a really unique, special family, and I think that's why we never broke up.
Yeah, because you said 2006 was the last time you put that record out. Did you tour on 4?
got kind of preempted for all kinds of random reasons. And then we were booking something when I was starting to feel like I need to move to Chicago thing, and how is this going to work for the band? So we played shows. Did we do a proper tour? Yeah, I think we did, like at least a month or two, all said and done.
How was that like, though, in 2006? Because I talk about this all the time, and this whole podcast is focused on the late 90s and early 2000s, and then after that, everything shifted, which I say all the time. But for you guys, you stuck with it through that transition, and obviously your sound...
We were old men, and no one knew what to do with us.
Yeah, that's pretty much, yeah.
And people were happy that we were there again, because we were like the Abelian Nation now, who were like, no, everybody, this is real, and it's good that you're doing this. That kind of like, person in their late 20s validation that you really seek when you're someone in their early 20s or in their late teens. So we were there to be that, but no, it had become a strange world, and gas was expensive, in which the internet was cheap. And so like the aesthetics of your live show became less important than your graphic design skills when you were burning your own CDs or whatever. And this wasn't a change that we kept up with, or that we were capable of keeping up with.
Yeah, I mean, did it get a little bump? Like, were you kind of bummed when you're on the road, just being like, "Oh, this sucks"?
Kind of the details of it would be sucky, but especially because we were in New York, we could drive a lot of places pretty quickly, and just like it wouldn't be as fun as it used to be, but still, when you got there, and we were still the fastest, most complicated, and so we always had this concept of like the band that wins the night versus the band that wins the month. The band that wins the month like sells records and people like them. The band that wins the night is whoever's the fastest and the loudest, and everyone has to be like, oh shit, you guys were faster and louder. And we were consistently win the night. This was like we were a band's band, And so that never changed. And sort of seeing kids wake up and be like, what the fuck are you guys doing? And you'd be like, yeah, that's cool, right? Never got old. And I would say the other thing that never got old was playing places and having people come in who were not part of the scene and be like, what is going on in here? What are you doing? Was always keep me going for months and months. Like just some construction worker would come into the bar and be like, who is playing now? I want to talk to these people. And it, invariably would be us. And I don't think that's because we were the world's best band. I think we were the world's most something band, and people realized that there was something happening that wasn't part of their ordinary aesthetic experience. And I always just got an enormous gratifying kick out of that.
Did we ever actually talk to each other? I don't ever remember like hanging out with you guys in Binghamton or after a show, or
I don't think so. I think you all were a little younger than us and probably wouldn't have necessarily been in the same places even after the show,
I think I remember being afraid of you guys because the sound was so aggressive. I remember they're like, you guys are playing a show with iFarm. I'm like, we don't belong on that bill. Like I'm like, those guys are like fast and their crowd is so different. I'm like, we're not going to fit in because we're writing this poppy shit about girls and breakups. Like, are you sure? They're like, oh yeah, absolutely.
We were totally, yeah. We were totally the crossover for that crowd. I think part of the thing though also, and I think this is something that we didn't decide, but was kind of cool about us, was that we didn't dress differently in our regular lives than we did on stage. And I actually think that is sort of, in the end, tougher and a little more intimidating. The only proof I can give of that anecdotally is actually my mom, which was, I had this great poster that was when Ministry and Helmet went on tour. Do you remember that tour?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't remember that tour. I just remember when those bands were like huge back then.
Yeah. And they had this great poster. I'm going to let this helicopter go by. And I'm also just warning you, actually, it looks like my computer is going to die in a couple minutes.
No, we can wrap this up.
So I had this Ministry Helmet poster in my bedroom, and my mom one day walked into my room, and she was like, this is when I was in high school, and she was like, these guys, I get it. They look like rock stars. She's pointing at Ministry, right? Probably the most drugged up, like, you don't want your kids hanging out with them band who existed in the 90s. And she was like, and they don't scare me. But then these people, and she pointed a helmet, and in this picture they were all wearing their frat boy
striped
white hats
and shit.
Yeah, and she was like, and they terrify me. Are they like Nazis or something? Like, what is the deal? Like, they look scary. And I think there is something to that.
Oh, absolutely.
To this sort of frankness of dress when you just sort of look like, for me, I look like a grad student, like you just sort of, but then you're yelling and sweating through it like you don't care. And I think that can mean more than all the bullet
absolutely.
vests, all the bullet belts and vests in the world,
Oh man, when I would see, like I remember just seeing a video of Quicksand playing. They were at Warped Tour. It was like it was a snippet of them playing in some skate video that I was watching, and they were just like shorts and a t-shirt. But I'm like, their sound
It
is,
made it heavier.
oh
It made it
man,
heavier.
it made it
Yeah.
so much heavier because you're like, I don't know why, because it's like if just visually they just look lighter and they don't have all this leather. It's like they're not forcing it. They're just like we're just casually. This is how we are, but we're bringing this sound out of us that's coming from like you're just like, where's this coming from? And that you're right, that is more intimidating. That's so funny. I never thought about that.
Such good stuff.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I used to love bands that scared the shit out of me. I remember seeing At the Drive-In one time, and I was nervous before they got in. They were playing Coney Island High, and they're just setting up their instruments, and I was getting like butterflies. I'm like, I don't know why I'm scared right now, but this band, like, I'm so. And then they played. I was like,
It
this is the
is
greatest
that
thing.
hint of scaredness that is what gives rock and roll, and I'm not just saying punk rock. The whole thing is slightly a threat, and that's what makes it interesting.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I haven't been to a show. I think also from playing so many shows, I got to see how the sausage was made. I know what the behind the scenes was. And not like we ever had like these big green rooms to share. It was just the behind the scenes was the door leading out to the parking lot is where you would just bring your shit in. I'm like, oh, that's where these guys would hang out? Like, I thought this was way
Totally.
fucking cooler. And once I
Totally.
saw that, it just made me, I felt like I was on a level with all these other bands that I saw. I'm like, oh, it's just they're not as intimidating anymore. And even now when I see bands, I'm just like,
They're just loading in, man. Just
yeah,
loading in.
they're loading in, or they're like hanging out in the back in their van or something, or the green room is. I know all the green rooms just look like crap. These shitty little spaces are just like, oh, okay, this
Totally.
isn't as scary anymore. But you said your computer's slowly dying, or
Yeah,
regularly dying?
yeah. 1%. So
Oh
I should
shit.
probably go, but this was super fun.
Yeah. So two questions before we end.
Yeah.
One, what would you like to plug?
Oh, I definitely, without question, I want everyone to go out and listen to Chilton's new record, which is Josh Carothers from iFarm. It's called Little Birds. It is, and I'm about to say the thing that I say every band tries to say about themselves, but it is such a mixture of so many different things that you love put together into one aggressive product. I love it. So Chilton, and that's going to be on Spotify. It's going to be wherever you get your music, and it is a symptom / great example of the phenomenon we were just talking about, which is so many influences just ground down into one fine product.
All right. So last question. What scene ethics do you still hold on to this day?
The scene ethics that are most important to me and will never change is that there is no such things as gatekeepers to power. We are those people. We have to be able to. DIY means more than just, oh, I'm going to make do with what I have right now. DIY means doing things your way because you don't ask for permission, because you don't believe that there's a single authority that should be able to tell you what you can and cannot express.